Millionaire finds his ex at his mother's hospital bed, shocked to learn she secretly raised his triplets. My beautiful family, today I bring you a story full of tears, revelations, and love you will never forget. A powerful journey of heartbreak and destiny. Don't miss what happens next, and especially Chapter 6. It will shake your soul with a surprise you never saw coming. So let's begin the story together. The rain hammered against Darren Thornhill's limousine, like 1,000 accusations he'd spent years outrunning. Each drop that exploded against the darkened glass seemed to whisper the same question he'd been avoiding since the phone call came through. When did you last see her? When did you last hold your mother's hand? When did you last sit beside her bed and ask how she was feeling, really feeling, beyond the polite scripts you recited during hurried holiday visits? The city blurred past in streaks of neon and shadow. Darren's reflection stared back at him from the window, a stranger in an expensive suit, with hollow eyes that had forgotten how to see anything beyond profit margins and quarterly reports. His phone buzzed incessantly in his pocket. Messages from partners, investors, people who needed his signature on documents that suddenly felt meaningless. He silenced it without looking. Faster, he told the driver, his voice hoarse. Sir, the roads are flooding. I don't care. Faster. The hospital loomed ahead, a massive structure of concrete and fluorescent lighting that seemed to swallow the storm whole. Darren was out of the car before it fully stopped, his leather shoes splashing through puddles he wouldn't have noticed in his previous life, the life from an hour ago, before the doctor's words had rearranged his understanding of urgency. Critical condition. Cardiac event. You should come immediately. The lobby was a chaos of movement and sound. Paramedics wheeling gurneys, families huddled in corners, the sharp antiseptic smell that clung to everything. Darren pushed through it all, his heart pounding so violently he wondered if he'd collapse before reaching her. 4th floor, intensive care, room 417. His hands trembled as he jabbed the elevator button. The seconds stretched into eternities. An old man stood beside him, crying softly into his sleeve, and Darren had the sudden, terrible thought that this might be his future, standing in elevators, crying over things he should have done differently when time still existed. The doors opened. He ran 4th floor. The corridor stretched endlessly, lined with identical doors, hiding identical tragedies. His shoes squeaked against the linoleum. A nurse looked up from her station, startled by his disheveled appearance, but he was already past her, reading room numbers like a desperate prayer. 413, 415, 417. He burst through the door without knocking, his chest heaving, water dripping from his hair and clothes. The words he'd prepared died in his throat. His mother lay in the hospital bed, frail and small, in a way that physically hurt to witness. Tubes ran from her arms. Machines beeped in steady rhythms that measured the distance between life and whatever came after. But none of that registered fully, because sitting in the chair beside the bed, holding his mother's hand with a tenderness that spoke of countless hours spent exactly this way, was a woman he hadn't seen in years, Faith Russell. Time collapsed. The rain, the drive, the panic, all of it evaporated, leaving only this impossible moment. She looked up at him, her dark eyes meeting his with an expression he couldn't read. Not surprise, not anger. Something far more unsettling, recognition without welcome. Darren, his mother whispered, her voice barely audible above the machinery. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. His eyes darted between them. His dying mother and the woman he'd destroyed, sitting together like this, was the most natural arrangement in the world. Mom, His voice cracked. What's happening? What's she doing here? Faith's jaw tightened, but she didn't release Lorraine's hand. She didn't stand. She didn't acknowledge his question at all, as if he were a ghost who'd walked into someone else's moment. Lorraine's fingers twitched, squeezing Faith's hand weakly. She's been here, the old woman breathed. Every time. When you weren't. The words hit him like physical blows. Darren stumbled forward, his hands gripping the bed's railing. What do you mean every time? Mom, I didn't know you were sick. Why didn't you tell me? I did, Lorraine whispered, her eyes glistening with tears or medication or both. You were always too busy. Always another meeting, another trip, another reason why later would be better, the truth of it carved through his defenses. How many calls had he ignored? How many messages had he marked as read without responding? He'd told himself his mother was strong, independent, that she understood his responsibilities. He'd been lying. Faith's been with me, Lorraine continued, her breathing labored. Through the appointments, the treatments, the nights when I couldn't sleep because the pain was too much. She sat with me, read to me, made sure I wasn't alone. Darren's eyes snapped to Faith. She still hadn't looked at him directly, her gaze fixed on Lorraine's face with fierce protectiveness. Why? The question escaped him before he could stop it. Why would you do that after— Don't! Faith's voice cut through the room like a blade. It was the first word she'd spoken, and it carried the weight of years. Don't you dare ask me that. Not here. Not now. His pride flared, that old familiar anger that rose whenever someone challenged him. I have a right to know why my ex is sitting with my mother when You have no rights here. Faith finally met his eyes, and what he saw there stopped him cold. Not hatred, not bitterness. Something worse, indifference, as if he were a stranger who'd wandered into the wrong room. You lost your rights when you disappeared from her life, just like you disappeared from mine. Faith, please, Lorraine wheezed, her monitor beginning to beep more frantically. Don't fight. Not here. A nurse rushed in, checking the machines, adjusting tubes. You need to stay calm, Mrs. Thornhill. Your heart rate is spiking. Darren backed away from the bed, his hands raised in surrender. But his eyes never left Faith, searching for some explanation that would make this make sense. How had the woman he'd left behind become the person his mother trusted more than her own son? Maybe you should wait outside, the nurse said gently, looking at Darren. I'm not leaving my mother. Then lower your voice and calm down, or I'll have to ask you to leave anyway. He nodded, swallowing the storm inside him. The nurse finished her checks and left, casting a warning glance over her shoulder. The silence that followed was suffocating. Lorraine had closed her eyes, exhausted from the brief exchange. Faith continued holding her hand, stroking the papery skin with infinite patience. Darren found himself studying her, really looking at her for the first time since he'd walked in. She'd changed. Her face held lines that hadn't been there before, evidence of hardships he knew nothing about. Her clothes were clean but worn, practical rather than fashionable. Her hair was pulled back in a simple style that spoke of someone who couldn't waste time on vanity. But beneath the weariness, she was still beautiful, still Faith, and she still wouldn't look at him. I need to understand, he said quietly, trying to keep his voice from waking his mother. Please, just tell me what's happening. Faith's expression didn't soften. What's happening is that someone had to be here. Someone had to care. Someone had to be present when the person who should have been here decided his life was too important to make room for his own mother. That's not fair. Fair? She almost laughed, but it was a sound devoid of humor. You want to talk about fair? I didn't know she was this sick. If I'd known, you would have made time, cleared your schedule? You would have been the son she needed? Faith shook her head. Maybe, but you didn't know because you never asked. You never slowed down long enough to notice that the woman who raised you was falling apart. Darren wanted to argue, to defend himself, but every word that formed in his mind felt hollow. She was right. God help him, she was completely right. Why did she call you? He asked instead. How did this even start? She didn't call me. I called her. Why? For the first time, something flickered in Faith's eyes, a shadow of pain that mirrored his own. Because despite everything, despite what you did to me, she was good to me once. Before you believed the lies, before you chose pride over truth. She was kind when I had nothing. And when I heard she was sick, I couldn't just do nothing. The implications of her words swirled through his mind. But before he could grasp them fully, his mother stirred. Her eyes opened, focusing on him with sudden clarity. Darren, she whispered, I need you to listen. Faith stays. I trust her more than anyone. She's been my family when my own son couldn't be. The declaration should have hurt less because it was true. Instead, it destroyed him. Mom, I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere. You say that, Lorraine breathed, but Faith proves it. Every day. She's here every day. The words hung in the air between them, a challenge and an indictment all at once. Darren felt the foundations of his life shifting beneath him, as if the hospital floor was splitting open to reveal how little he'd actually built, how much he'd lost while counting his victories. He opened his mouth to respond, to promise, to beg, but Faith spoke first. Mrs. Thornhill needs rest. If you're going to stay, you need to be quiet. She stood then, finally releasing Lorraine's hand, and moved toward the small bathroom connected to the room. As she passed him, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of soap and exhaustion, she paused. "There are children in the hallway," she said, her voice so low only he could hear. "They're waiting for me. Try not to upset them with your presence, children." The word echoed in his mind as she disappeared into the bathroom, closing the door behind her with a soft click that sounded like finality. Darren stood frozen, his heart now racing for entirely different reasons. Children? What children? Faith's children? The timeline crashed through his thoughts, but before he could calculate anything, before he could make sense of what she'd said, his feet were moving. He had to see, had to know, had to understand what else he'd missed while building his empire of emptiness. He stepped toward the door, his hand reaching for the handle, his entire world about to shatter in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. Chapter 2. The Ghost Who Stayed. The hospital corridor felt different when Darren emerged from his mother's room, as if he'd crossed some invisible threshold between the life he knew and a truth he'd been running from. The lights overhead cast everything in that particular shade of despair that only hospitals seem to manufacture. He looked left, then right, searching for the children Faith had mentioned. The hallway stretched empty in both directions, punctuated only by the occasional nurse moving between rooms with practiced efficiency. Perhaps she'd been mistaken. Perhaps he'd misheard. Perhaps no. Faith didn't make mistakes like that. She'd said it deliberately, wanting him to know, wanting him to search. He walked slowly, his expensive shoes squeaking against the spotless floor, checking each waiting area. The sound of his own breathing seemed unnaturally loud. His hands trembled at his sides, though whether from the encounter with Faith or from whatever he was about to discover. He couldn't tell. Then he heard them, children's voices, soft and musical, drifting from an alcove near the elevator banks. He froze, every instinct screaming at him to turn back, to return to his mother's room, to pretend he hadn't heard. But his feet moved forward anyway, drawn by something primal and terrifying. 3 boys sat in a row on a long bench, their legs swinging in that unconscious way children have when their feet don't quite reach the ground. They were eating crackers from a paper bag, sharing them with careful equality that spoke of practice. The oldest-looking one was telling some story that made the others giggle, their heads bent close together like conspirators. Darren couldn't breathe. They looked like him, not vaguely, not in some distant way that could be coincidence. They looked exactly like the photographs his mother kept in albums he hadn't looked at in years. The same nose, the same jawline, the same way their hair fell across their foreheads. One of them even had that small dimple in his left cheek that Darren saw every morning in the mirror. His knees went weak. He gripped the wall for support, unable to look away, unable to process what his eyes were telling his brain. The middle child noticed him first. The boy's dark eyes, Faith's eyes, widened slightly, and he nudged his brother. Then all 3 were staring at him with open curiosity, the kind only children possess, unfiltered and honest. "Why's that man looking at us?" The smallest one whispered, though not quietly enough. "Maybe he's lost," another offered. "Should we tell someone?" Darren tried to speak, tried to form words, but his throat had closed completely. The world tilted sideways. These children, these boys who couldn't be more than a handful of years old, were his. He knew it with certainty that bypassed logic and landed directly in his bones. The oldest boy stood, taking a protective step in front of his brothers. "Can we help you, sir?" The formality of it, this child addressing him like a stranger, shattered something inside Darren. "Sir, not Daddy. Not Father, sir. His voice came out strangled. "I was just— Bruce, don't talk to strangers," the middle child warned, tugging on his brother's shirt. Bruce. The name registered dimly. He wanted to know the others' names, wanted to know everything, wanted to rewind time and undo whatever choices had led to this moment where his own children looked at him like a potential threat. "I'm not," Darren started, then stopped. What could he say? "I'm your father. I didn't know you existed. Your mother and I used to love each other before I destroyed everything." The smallest boy suddenly scrambled off the bench and ran, not away from Darren, but toward the room he'd just left. Toward Faith. "Mommy!" The child's voice echoed down the corridor. "Mommy, there's a man staring at us." The word hit him like a punch to the chest. Mommy, Faith, was their mother, which meant, God help him, he was their father. The remaining two boys looked uncertain now, sensing his distress, but not understanding it. Bruce took another step back, his hand reaching for his brother's. "We should go get Mom," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving Darren's face. Before Darren could respond, before he could gather the shattered pieces of his composure, Faith appeared in the corridor. She moved with the speed of a mother protecting her young, her expression transforming from confusion to fury when she saw him standing there, staring at her children. "Get away from them." Her voice carried the kind of command that made even Darren step back instinctively. "Now, Faith, I wasn't. I said get away from my sons, her sons." The possessive pronoun carved another wound. "Not our sons. Not even their sons. Hers. Because she'd earned that right through years of presence, and he'd forfeited it through absence." She reached the boys and immediately dropped to their level, her hands moving over them, checking that they were all right with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this countless times. "Did he touch you? Did he say anything?" "No, Mommy," Bruce answered, his voice steady despite the tension. "He just stood there looking at us funny. We weren't sure if he needed help or something," the middle child added. The smallest one clung to Faith's leg, peeking out at Darren with wide eyes. "Is he the man making you sad?" The question stopped everything. Faith's hands stilled, her eyes closed briefly, and when they opened again, Darren saw something in them that made him want to disappear. Not anger, but bone-deep weariness. "Go back to the room," she told the boys gently. "Stay with Grandma Lorraine. I'll be there in a minute." "But Mom, now, Bruce." The authority in her voice brooked no argument. The three boys filed past Darren, giving him a wide berth, their small faces marked with confusion and concern. He watched them go, each step they took away from him, feeling like a door closing on possibility. When they disappeared into the room, Faith turned on him with barely contained rage. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice low but vibrating with intensity. "How dare you approach my children without permission, without warning, without—" She stopped, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "Do you have any idea what you could have done to them?" "They're mine too," Darren heard himself say, the words escaping before his brain could stop them. Faith's laugh was harsh and broken. "Yours? You think biology makes them yours? You think contributing DNA years ago gives you any claim to them?" "I didn't know." The defense sounded pathetic even to his own ears. "Faith, I swear to God, I didn't know you were pregnant. I didn't know they existed." "Because you didn't want to know," she shot back. "Because you made it very clear that I was a problem to be eliminated from your life. You had your secretary ban me from your office. You changed your phone number. You moved to a different apartment without telling me. You erased me like I was a mistake you'd made in a moment of weakness. Each accusation landed with precision because each one was true." Darren had done exactly that. After his mother had shown him the evidence, fabricated evidence he was beginning to understand, he'd cut Faith out with surgical efficiency. No second chances, no benefit of the doubt. Just a clean amputation of the relationship. "Your mother told you I was using you," Faith continued, her voice breaking slightly. That I was after your money, that I'd been seeing other men, and you believed her without question, without even asking me for my side. You just decided I was guilty and walked away. She had proof, Darren whispered, knowing how hollow it sounded. She had lies, carefully constructed lies that played into every fear you had about being used. And you accepted them because it was easier than trusting someone who loved you. Loved, past tense. The death of that word hung between them. I came to find you, Faith said, her eyes glistening. When I realized I was pregnant. When I knew I was carrying your children. Yes, children, plural. Because apparently the universe has a sense of humor. I came to tell you. I stood in that lobby for hours, Darren. Hours. Watching people come and go. Watching you through the glass walls of your office. Seeing you laugh and shake hands and live your life while I stood there with our children growing inside me. The image destroyed him. Faith, young and scared and pregnant, standing in his office building while he ignored her existence. Your secretary said you'd left explicit instructions, she continued, that under no circumstances was I to be allowed through, that if I persisted, security would escort me out, so I left. And I decided that if you wanted nothing to do with me, you'd get nothing to do with them either. That's not fair, Darren managed. They're my children. I had a right to know. Rights. Faith's voice rose slightly before she caught herself, glancing toward the room where the boys waited. You talk about rights? Where were your rights when I gave birth alone? When I worked myself sick, trying to feed 3 babies on minimum wage? When I had to choose between buying diapers and paying rent? You want to talk about rights after I've spent years being both mother and father to them? I would have helped. If I'd known, would you? The question cut through his protests. Really? You'd abandoned me because your mother whispered poison in your ear. You'd thrown away what we had without even hearing my side. What makes you think you'd have suddenly become Father of the Year just because I showed up pregnant? He had no answer, no defense, because she was right. The man he'd been back then, proud, arrogant, convinced of his own righteousness, would probably have accused her of trying to trap him, would have demanded paternity tests, would have made the whole situation even more painful than it already was. I came back to your office one more time, Faith said quietly, all the fight draining from her voice. When the boys were babies, I brought pictures. I thought maybe if you saw them, if you saw their faces, you'd understand. But you'd moved. The company had relocated, and I realized you'd moved on completely, built your life, became someone important, someone too important for the girl you left behind. Faith, your mother knew, she interrupted. Did you know that? She knew about them. I brought them to her when they were infants, begged her to tell you to help me. She offered me money to disappear. A substantial amount, enough that I could have lived comfortably for years. Darren's world tilted again. His mother had known, had met his children, had hidden them from him. I took it, Faith admitted, and there was shame in her voice now. I was desperate. I had 3 babies and no help, and I was drowning. So I took her money, and I promised to stay away. But I couldn't do it. I sent it back, every penny. Told her I didn't want her blood money, that my sons weren't for sale. Then why are you here now? Darren asked, genuinely confused. Why take care of her after everything she did? Faith's eyes softened slightly, looking past him toward the room. Because she called me, when she got really sick, when she thought she was dying. She called me crying, apologizing, begging me to forgive her. She said she'd been wrong, that she'd destroyed your life and mine because she was selfish and controlling. She said she didn't want to die without making it right. So you came. So I came, Faith confirmed. Not for her. Not really, but because I understood what it meant to be alone and scared and facing death. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. Not even her. The complexity of it stunned him. Faith's capacity for forgiveness toward his mother, while maintaining absolute boundaries with him. You're a better person than I deserve, Darren said honestly. I'm not doing this for you, Faith replied. I'm doing this so my sons can see that forgiveness is possible, that we don't have to carry hate forever, that sometimes people make terrible mistakes and still deserve compassion. can I see them again?" The words tumbled out desperately. "The boys, can I talk to them? Can I—" "No." The answer was immediate and non-negotiable. You don't get to walk back into their lives because you suddenly know they exist. You don't get to disrupt everything they've built just because you're curious. They have stability. They have routine. They have a mother who's been there every single day of their lives. And they don't have questions about why their father abandoned them because they don't know who you are. You didn't tell them about me. What was I supposed to say? Faith's voice cracked. Your father knew about you and didn't want to meet you? Your father chose wealth over family? Your father thought I was lying about being pregnant? There was no version of that story that didn't hurt them, so I told them their father was gone. Not dead, just gone. And that was enough for now. But I'm here now, Darren pleaded. I'm right here. I want to know them. I want to be their father. Wanting isn't the same as doing, Faith said firmly. And knowing isn't the same as being. You're a stranger, Darren. A stranger who looks like them. That's all. And until you prove otherwise, until you prove you can be more than someone who appears when it's convenient, you stay away from my children. Your mother's in there dying, Darren whispered, gesturing toward the room. Are you going to tell her she can't see her grandchildren? Faith's expression hardened. Your mother sees them all the time. She knows them. She reads them stories. She remembers their favorite foods and their fears and their dreams. She earned that right by being present. You haven't. The distinction destroyed him. Even his mother, the woman who'd hidden his children from him, had more claim to them than he did. How do I prove it? He asked, his pride finally crumbling completely. How do I earn the right to be their father? Faith studied him for a long moment, weighing something he couldn't see. Finally she spoke. You start by leaving them alone. You start by respecting that they don't know you. You start by understanding that this isn't about what you want. It's about what's best for them. And if you can't do that, if you can't put them first, even when it costs you everything, then you've already failed. She turned to walk back toward the room, back toward the children and his dying mother, back toward the life she'd built without him. Faith, he called after her desperately. She paused but didn't turn around. I'm sorry, he said, the words inadequate but true. For everything. I'm so sorry. Apologies don't raise children, she replied, her back still to him. They don't feed them or clothe them or hold them when they're scared. Sorry is just a word, Darren. And I've had enough words to last a lifetime. She disappeared into the room, and the door closed softly behind her, leaving him standing alone in the hallway with the weight of his failures pressing down on him like gravity had suddenly tripled. He had children. 3 sons who didn't know his name, and the woman he'd once loved hated him for reasons he couldn't argue against. Darren slid down the wall until he was sitting on the cold hospital floor, his head in his hands, and for the first time in years, maybe the first time since he was a child himself, he cried. Chapter 3. Faces in the corridor. Time moved strangely in hospitals. Minutes stretched into hours or collapsed into seconds. Darren sat on that cold floor until his legs went numb, until a passing nurse gently suggested he move to the waiting area, until the weight of everything finally forced him to stand and face what he'd become. He didn't return to his mother's room immediately. Instead, he found a bathroom and stared at himself in the mirror. The man looking back was foreign, red-eyed, disheveled, stripped of the polish that usually defined him. This was what truth looked like when it caught up with you, raw and undefended. He splashed cold water on his face, the shock of it grounding him temporarily. His hands gripped the porcelain sink until his knuckles went white. 3 children, his children, growing up without him, without his name, without even the knowledge that he existed. The rage came then, hot and fierce. Not at Faith, not even at himself. At his mother. The woman lying in that hospital bed had known, had met them, had paid Faith to disappear, then called her back when it suited her purposes. She'd played God with all their lives, and was only confessing now because death had finally scared her into honesty. He dried his face roughly with paper towels and walked back toward the room. This time he knocked, waited, tried to remember how to be someone who asked permission instead of demanding entry. Faith opened the door, her expression guarded. Behind her, he could hear his mother's labored breathing and the quiet murmur of children's voices. "Can I come in?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. "The boys are here. I know. I'll stay away from them. I need to talk to my mother." Something flickered in Faith's eyes, surprise maybe that he was actually listening. She stepped aside, opening the door wider but positioning herself between him and the children like a human shield. Darren entered slowly, keeping his eyes fixed on the bed. His mother's condition had visibly declined even in the short time he'd been gone. Her skin had taken on a grey pallor that made his chest tighten with fear. The three boys were indeed there, crowded onto a single chair near the window, sharing what looked like a colouring book. They glanced up when he entered, then quickly looked away, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. "Darren!" his mother wheezed, her hand lifting slightly from the bed in weak acknowledgement. He pulled a chair close to the opposite side of the bed from where Faith stood. He wanted to yell, wanted to demand answers, wanted to shake her and ask how she could have done this. But she was dying, and rage felt obscene in the face of that finality. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked instead, his voice barely above a whisper. Lorraine's eyes filled with tears. "I was afraid." "Of what?" "Of losing you. Of you choosing them over me. Of not being the most important person in your life anymore." The confession came out broken, punctuated by gasping breaths. "I was selfish. I wanted you all to myself. I'd worked so hard to build our company, to make you successful, and I couldn't bear the thought of you being distracted by a family of your own." "They're my children," Darren said, the words still strange on his tongue. "My sons, I know. I know that now. When I met them, when I saw their faces, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. But by then it was too late." Faith had moved on. "You'd moved on!" The lie was already too big to undo. "You paid her to disappear." "I did," Lorraine admitted, shame coloring her voice. "I thought money would solve it. That's what I always thought, that everything had a price, that I could buy my way out of consequences. But she sent it back. She had more integrity than I deserved." Darren glanced at Faith, who stood rigid and watchful, her eyes never leaving the children. They were still colouring, the smallest one humming softly to himself, blissfully unaware of the conversation reshaping their world. "What are their names?" Darren asked suddenly, the question directed at Faith. She hesitated, as if even this small piece of information was too much to share. But finally she answered. "Bruce, Peter, Clark." The names settled into him, finding places he hadn't known were empty. Bruce, Peter, Clark, his sons. Which is which? Faith's jaw tightened, but she gestured toward them with her chin. "Bruce is the oldest, the one on the left with the book. Peter is in the middle. Clark is the youngest." Bruce looked up at that moment, meeting Darren's eyes directly for the first time. The boy didn't smile, didn't frown, just studied him with an intensity that was unnerving in someone so young. "You're the man from the hallway," Bruce said, his voice clear and confident. "I am," Darren managed. "Are you sick too?" The question caught him off guard. "No, I'm here for my mother." "That's Grandma Lorraine," Bruce continued, as if explaining something Darren should already know. "She's very sick. Mom says we have to be quiet and gentle with her." "That's right," Darren agreed, his throat tight. Peter looked up then, his eyes, so similar to Faith's, curious. "Are you Grandma Lorraine's son?" "Yes. We've never seen you before," Peter observed, with the brutal honesty of childhood. "I've been away," Darren said. "The lie tasting like ash. That's what Mom says about our dad, too." Clark spoke for the first time, his voice softer than his brother's. "That he's away. Maybe you know him." The room went silent. Faith's face had gone pale. Lorraine's eyes closed, fresh tears leaking from their corners, and Darren felt his heart physically stop beating for a moment. "Clark, that's enough questions," Faith said quickly, her voice strained. "Let's give Grandma Lorraine some quiet time. But I just want to know, now, baby. We can finish coloring in the hallway." The boys gathered their things reluctantly, clearly sensing they'd stumbled into something significant without understanding what. As they filed out, Bruce paused near Darren's chair. "It's okay if you don't know our dad," the boy said kindly. "Lots of people don't. He's very busy and important. That's what Mom says." The words were meant to comfort. Instead, they eviscerated him. Faith had protected him in her explanations to the boys, had made him sound noble rather than absent, had given him a grace he absolutely didn't deserve. "Thank you," Darren whispered, not trusting his voice for anything more. Bruce nodded seriously, then followed his brothers out. Faith gave Darren one long, unreadable look before following them, closing the door softly behind her, alone with his mother. Darren finally let the facade crack completely. "They don't know," he said, his voice breaking. "They have no idea I'm their father." Faith wanted to protect them, Lorraine rasped. "From the truth, from being hurt, from wondering why you didn't want them. I didn't know about them. But if you had..." His mother's question hung in the air, damning and fair. "If she'd told you back then, when you were so sure she'd betrayed you, what would you have done?" Darren wanted to lie, wanted to say he would have stepped up, been responsible, done the right thing. But he was done with lies. "I don't know," he admitted. "I was so angry, so convinced you were right about her. I probably would have accused her of trying to trap me, demanded tests, made everything worse. That's why she didn't fight harder," Lorraine said. "She knew the man you were then wasn't ready to be a father, wasn't capable of putting anyone before yourself. And now you know the truth. Now you have to decide what kind of man you want to be. The one who lets pride and hurt keep him from his children, or the one who fights for the chance to be in their lives, even if it means starting from nothing." Darren looked at his mother, truly looked at her, and saw the regret carved into every line of her face. She'd been beautiful once, commanding and strong. Now she was just old and scared and dying. "Why did you do it?" he asked. "Really? Was it just about keeping me close?" Lorraine's breathing grew more labored. The machines around her beeped faster, signaling distress. But she pushed through, needing to say these words while she still could. "I was lonely," she confessed. "Your father died when you were young. I poured everything into the company, into making us successful. You were all I had. And when I saw how you looked at Faith, how you loved her, I was terrified. Terrified of being alone. Terrified of being replaced. So I destroyed it. I manufactured evidence. I made you doubt her. I played on every insecurity I'd carefully cultivated in you. The admission should have made him hate her. Instead, he felt only a terrible, hollow sadness. They'd both been prisoners of fear, her fear of abandonment, his fear of being used. And in trying to protect themselves, they'd destroyed everything worth having. "I'm going to fix this," Darren said, taking his mother's hand carefully, mindful of the IV lines. "Somehow. I don't know how yet, but I'm going to be the father they deserve." "It won't be easy," Lorraine warned. "Faith is strong. She won't forgive quickly. And the boys. They have their own feelings, their own understanding of the world. You can't just walk in and expect them to welcome you. I know, but you're going to try anyway." "I have to." "They're my sons," Lorraine squeezed his hand weakly. "They're good boys, smart, kind. Bruce is protective, like you were as a child. Peter is sensitive, always worried about others. And Clark is an old soul. He sees things others miss. Faith raised them well, better than I could have imagined." The praise of Faith, coming from the woman who tried to destroy her, felt both genuine and tragic. "Too little, too late," as the saying went. "Does she hate me?" Darren asked. "Truly hate me?" "I don't think so," Lorraine said after a moment. "I think she's hurt, deeply hurt, and tired. So very tired. Raising 3 children alone while working constantly. It's broken something in her, but hate. No, if she hated you, she wouldn't have protected your image to the boys. She wouldn't have made you sound like someone worth knowing eventually." A nurse entered to check the monitors, her expression professional but concerned. "Mrs. Thornhill, your blood pressure is elevated. You need to rest, soon," Lorraine promised. "Just a few more minutes." The nurse looked like she wanted to argue but nodded reluctantly. 5 minutes. Then everyone out except one person. When they were alone again, Lorraine's grip on Darren's hand tightened with surprising strength. "Listen to me," she said urgently. When I'm gone, everything goes to you. The company, the properties, the money, all of it. Mom, don't let me finish. I've already changed my will. Half of everything goes into a trust for the boys, for their education, their future. But I need you to promise me something, anything. Don't use money to try to win them over. Don't shower them with gifts or throw wealth at the problem. Faith will see right through it, and it will only push her further away. If you want to be their father, you have to do it the hard way. With time, with presence, with sacrifice, I promise. And be patient with Faith. She's been fighting alone for so long, she doesn't know how to let anyone help. She'll resist you. She'll test you. She'll make it as difficult as possible because she needs to know you're serious, that you won't give up and disappear again. I won't, Darren vowed. Good. Lorraine's eyes drifted closed, exhaustion finally claiming her. Then maybe something good can come from all my mistakes. Maybe those boys will get the father they deserve. And maybe Faith will finally get the partner she needed all along. Her hand went slack in his. For a terrifying moment, Darren thought she'd died, but the machines continued their steady beeping. She was just sleeping, her body demanding rest after the emotional purging. He sat there holding her hand, watching her breathe, understanding with crystal clarity that this might be one of the last real conversations they ever had. His mother, manipulative, controlling, but also scared and human, had finally told him the truth. And in doing so, had given him the chance to become someone better than he'd been. The door opened quietly. Faith stepped in, her eyes immediately going to the monitors to check Lorraine's status. She's just sleeping, Darren assured her. Faith nodded, then moved to adjust the blankets around Lorraine with practiced care. She'd done this countless times, he realized. While he was in boardrooms and on flights and living his important life, she'd been here, caring for the woman who'd tried to ruin her. Why do you do it? He asked softly. Take care of her after everything? Faith was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, without looking at him, she spoke. Because holding on to hate takes energy I don't have. Because my boys need to see that forgiveness is possible, even when someone doesn't deserve it. Because your mother apologized, really apologized, not the kind where you're sorry you got caught, but the kind where you understand the damage you caused. And because, she paused, her hands stilling on the blanket, because I know what it's like to be terrified and alone. And I wouldn't wish that on anyone, not even on me. Faith finally met his eyes. You're already alone, Darren. You've been alone for years, surrounded by things you own, but nothing that owns a piece of you. Your mother being in this bed didn't make you alone. You built that isolation yourself, brick by brick, until you'd constructed a life that looks full from the outside, but feels empty from within. The truth of it stripped him bare. I want to change, he said desperately. I want to know them. I want to be their father. Then you'll need to be patient, Faith said, and prove yourself through actions, not declarations. Are you prepared for that? Are you prepared to be present every day, with no promise that they'll ever call you Dad? The question terrified him, but he nodded anyway. Then we'll see, Faith said, turning back to Lorraine. But it starts with respecting boundaries. No approaching them without my permission. No trying to buy their affection. No using your mother's illness to manipulate your way into their lives. If you can follow those rules, we'll start with supervised visits. Brief ones. And only if the boys want to. They don't even know who I am, Darren pointed out. Faith's smile was sad and tired. Then I guess you'd better figure out how to introduce yourself in a way that doesn't break their hearts. She left him then, stepping back into the hallway where the boys waited, where her real life existed, the one she'd built without him. Darren sat in the growing darkness of the hospital room, listening to his mother breathe and understanding that he was standing at a crossroads. One path led back to his comfortable life, where he could pretend he'd never learned the truth. The other path led into uncertainty, rejection, and the hardest work he'd ever face. But on that second path waited 3 boys with his face and their mother's strength. And for the first time in years, the choice felt obvious. He stood, pressed a gentle kiss to his mother's forehead, and walked out into the corridor, Faith and the boys had moved to a different waiting area, but he could see them through the glass, Faith helping Clark with his shoes while Bruce read something to Peter. A complete unit. A family he hadn't known existed. Darren pulled out his phone and made the first of many calls he'd need to make. He cancelled meetings, pushed projects, told his assistant he'd be unavailable indefinitely. His company would survive without him. It had been designed to, but this chance, this opportunity to become someone who mattered beyond a bank account, wouldn't wait. When he looked up from his phone, he found Bruce staring at him through the glass. The boy tilted his head, studying him with that same unnerving intensity, as if trying to solve a puzzle. Darren raised his hand in a small wave. Bruce didn't wave back, but he didn't look away either, and in that moment of connection, fragile and uncertain and full of possibility, Darren understood that the hardest journey of his life was just beginning. Chapter 4, The Reckoning. The night stretched endlessly. Hospital time operated on its own strange logic, where seconds dragged like hours and hours collapsed into nothing. Darren found himself unable to leave, despite having nowhere specific to be. He'd claimed a corner of the waiting area, watching from a distance as Faith navigated the complexities of keeping 3 young boys calm in an environment designed to unsettle. She was extraordinary at it, patient when Peter couldn't stop fidgeting, firm when Bruce tested boundaries, gentle when Clark grew quiet and withdrew. She'd clearly done this many times before, turning waiting rooms into temporary homes with nothing but her presence and an apparently bottomless supply of snacks and quiet activities. Around midnight, Bruce fell asleep with his head on Faith's lap. Peter curled against her side. Clark fought sleep with the determination of someone afraid to miss something important, but eventually his eyes drifted closed too, and Faith sat there, pinned by the weight of her sleeping children, looking more drained than Darren had ever seen another human being look. He wanted to help, to offer to carry one of the boys, to do something useful. But he stayed where he was, knowing that his presence would only complicate things, that Faith was managing fine without him, as she'd been managing for years. A doctor emerged from his mother's room around 1 in the morning. Faith gently extracted herself from the tangle of children, a process that took several minutes and displayed the kind of practiced skill that came from repetition, and went to speak with him. Darren stood, moving closer but not close enough to intrude. He couldn't hear the whole conversation, but he caught fragments. Stable for now. Next few hours critical. Need to prepare for outcomes. The euphemisms people used when they meant death without wanting to say the word. Faith's shoulders slumped slightly, then straightened again. She thanked the doctor, asked several specific questions about pain management and comfort measures, then returned to her children. She gathered her things quietly, preparing to wake them and leave. Darren stepped forward before he could stop himself. "Let me help," he said quietly. "I have a car. I can drive you home." Faith looked at him with an expression that suggested she'd forgotten he was there. "We can manage. I know you can. But you don't have to, please, it's late." "They're worn out." "You're worn out. Let me do this one thing." Something in his tone, maybe the genuine plea rather than entitled demand, made her pause. She studied him for a long moment, weighing options he couldn't see. "Fine," she said finally. "But just the ride. Nothing more. And you drop us off without expecting to be invited in or given an explanation of where we live." Understood. Waking the boys was an art form. Faith did it with whispered words and gentle touches, coaxing them back to consciousness without startling them. Bruce woke first, blinking slowly and looking around with confusion. "Time to go home," Faith told him softly. "But Grandma Lorraine is sleeping. We'll come back tomorrow." "I promise." Peter stirred next, mumbling something incoherent. Clark remained stubbornly asleep until Faith finally had to pick him up, something that clearly strained her but that she managed anyway, settling him on her hip like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I've got him," Darren offered, reaching out instinctively. Clark's eyes snapped open instantly. suddenly very awake and very alarmed at finding a stranger's hands near him. He clung tighter to Faith, burying his face in her neck. "It's okay, baby," Faith soothed, rubbing his back. "We're just going home." "Who's that man?" Clark asked, his voice muffled. "Someone who's going to give us a ride, so Mommy doesn't have to carry all of you and all our things." Bruce looked at Darren with open suspicion. "Why would he do that?" "Because he's—" Faith paused, searching for words. "Because he's being kind." The explanation clearly didn't satisfy Bruce, but he was too tired to argue. Peter just held his mother's hand and yawned, swaying slightly on his feet. The walk to Darren's car was awkward and silent. Faith carried Clark, while managing a large bag of supplies. Bruce and Peter shuffled alongside her, holding onto her clothes. Darren carried nothing, feeling useless despite his offer of help. His car was exactly what Faith probably expected. Expensive, new, gleaming even in the dim parking garage lighting. The kind of vehicle that cost more than most people earned in several years. He saw her jaw tighten when she saw it, her expression closing off further. "I don't need your pity," she said quietly. "This isn't pity. This is just logistics." She didn't respond, but she did let him open the back door. Getting 3 sleepy children into car seats proved complicated, made worse by the fact that there were no car seats already installed. "They need car seats," Faith said, stating the obvious. "We'll have to take the bus." "At this hour? With 3 exhausted kids?" Darren shook his head. "We'll go slow. Be careful. It's not far, right?" "It's 20 minutes, normally, but without proper seats." "Then I'll drive like I'm carrying the most precious cargo in the world," Darren interrupted. "Because I am." Something flickered in Faith's eyes, acknowledgement of the truth in his words maybe, or just exhaustion winning out over caution. "Fine. But Peter sits on my lap in the front. Bruce and Clark in back with seatbelts. It wasn't legal. It wasn't safe. But it was safer than the alternatives available at 1 in the morning. They arranged themselves carefully, Faith holding Peter close, Bruce and Clark strapped in with adult seatbelts that fit them poorly, but better than nothing. Darren drove with more care than he'd ever driven in his life. Every turn gentle, every stop gradual. He kept the speed well below the limit, ignoring the honks from the few other cars on the road. The boys fell asleep again almost immediately. Peter's soft snores filled the car, oddly comforting. Bruce fought it longer, his eyes tracking Darren's hands on the wheel, watching for any sign of danger. Clark simply stared out the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. Faith directed him with single-word instructions. Left, right, straight. They drove through parts of the city Darren rarely saw, neighborhoods where the buildings huddled close together, where streetlights flickered uncertainly, where the divide between his world and Faith's became physically visible. "Here," she said finally, pointing to a modest apartment complex that had seen better days. Not quite run down, but definitely worn. Tired, like everything else in Faith's life seemed to be. Darren parked and moved to help with the children, but Faith held up a hand. "We're good. Thank you for the ride." "Faith, good night, Darren." She gathered Peter in her arms, then turned to wake Bruce and Clark. But before she could, Bruce spoke up, his voice cutting through the darkness. "Why do you keep looking at us like that?" Darren froze. "Like what?" "Like you're sad, or scared, or something. You keep staring at us when you think we don't notice. But I notice everything." Out of the mouths of children came the most devastating truths. Darren had no prepared answer, no script for this moment, I guess, he said carefully. I think you're all pretty remarkable. Your mother is amazing, and you 3 are lucky to have her." "We know," Bruce replied with the confidence of someone stating an absolute fact. "She's the best mom ever. She does everything for us. I can see that. So why are you here?" Bruce pressed. "Really? Mom doesn't have friends. She doesn't have time for friends. She just has us and work and Grandma Lorraine sometimes. So why are you suddenly around?" Faith's hand touched Bruce's shoulder gently. "That's enough questions for tonight. But Mom, Bruce," the single word carried enough weight to stop the interrogation. "Inside, now." The boy climbed out reluctantly, followed by Clark, who'd been silently absorbing everything. Faith balanced Peter on her hip and grabbed their bag, somehow managing both, despite looking like she might collapse at any moment. "I'll come back to the hospital tomorrow," Darren found himself saying, "to sit with my mother. Will you be there?" Faith paused at the entrance to the building. "We're there every day." "Then I'll see you tomorrow." She didn't acknowledge this, just disappeared into the building with her children. Darren sat in his car, engines still running, staring at the door they'd vanished through. He tried to imagine the apartment inside, tried to picture how Faith managed 3 active boys in what was probably a small space, tried to understand the daily reality of her life, the relentless juggling, the constant responsibility with no backup. His phone buzzed. Messages from his assistant marked urgent, problems that needed his attention, decisions that couldn't wait. He deleted them all without reading. The drive back to his penthouse felt longer than the drive to Faith's building, even though it was technically shorter. His home, if it could be called that, occupied the top floor of the city's most exclusive residential tower. Floor-to-ceiling windows, designer furniture, a view that cost more per month than most people's mortgages. It was empty, not just of people, empty in a way that had nothing to do with furniture or decoration. The kind of emptiness that echoed when you walked through it, that made you aware of your own breathing, that reminded you constantly that you were alone, and had been alone for so long you'd forgotten what it felt like to be otherwise. Darren stood at his window, looking out at the city sprawling below, and thought about Faith's tired apartment building, about 3 boys sharing a bedroom probably, about a woman who worked herself past the point of collapse to provide for children she'd never expected to raise alone. His phone rang. The hospital. His heart stopped. "Mr. Thornhill." The nurse's voice was professional but gentle. "Your mother is awake and asking for you. If you're able to come back." "I'm on my way." He was back in his car within minutes, driving through empty streets with purpose. The hospital parking garage was nearly deserted now. The corridors felt different in the deep night, quieter, more serious, as if the building itself knew this was when critical things happened. His mother's room was dimly lit, only a small lamp casting shadows. She looked smaller than before, if that was possible, more fragile, as if she were already halfway gone. "You came," she whispered. "Of course, I thought you might have left. Gone back to your life." "My life is here right now," Lorraine smiled weakly. "Oh, good, that's good. Sit with me. I need to tell you something." Darren pulled a chair close, taking her hand carefully. "What is it?" "I saw how you looked at them, the boys, your sons." Her breathing was labored, each word an effort. "You looked the way I wished you'd looked when you were their age, like they were the center of your world. They don't even know me. They will. If you let them, if you're patient." She paused, gathering strength. "I need to tell you things, before it's too late. Things about Faith, things I did. Mom, rest. We can talk later." "There might not be a later," she interrupted. "Listen, when Faith came to me with the boys, when she showed me their pictures, I knew immediately they were yours. It was undeniable, but I was still so angry at her for existing, for threatening my control over you. So I offered her money, a lot of money, enough to make sure she'd disappear permanently. She told me. She said she sent it back. She did. But before that, she asked me something. She asked if I'd ever been in love. Real love, the kind that makes you stupid and brave and willing to sacrifice everything." Lorraine's eyes filled with tears. I told her no. That love was weakness, that it made people vulnerable and foolish. And she looked at me with such pity. This young woman, alone and terrified with 3 babies, looked at me with pity. She said I was the poorest person she'd ever met, because I'd spent my whole life building wealth, but had never understood what it meant to be rich. The words hung in the air. Profound and damning. She was right, Lorraine continued. I built a fortune. I made sure you'd never want for anything material. But I stole the things that actually mattered. I stole your chance at real love. I stole those boys' father. I stole Faith's partner, all because I was too afraid to be alone. You're not alone now, Darren said softly, only because I'm dying. That's what it took for me to finally be honest. The threat of death scared me into truth. She squeezed his hand with surprising strength. Don't make my mistakes. Don't wait until you're dying to tell the people you love that you love them. Don't sacrifice the real for the comfortable. Don't let fear make you cruel. I don't know how to fix this, Darren admitted. I don't know how to become someone they'd want as a father. You start by being present. Every day. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. You prove it through consistency, not words. And you accept that forgiveness might never come, but you keep being present anyway. She paused, breathing heavily. And you need to tell Faith the truth. The whole truth. About what I did. About the evidence I fabricated. About every lie I told to drive you apart. She deserves to know. She'll hate me even more when she learns how easily I believed those lies. Maybe, but she'll respect honesty. Faith values truth above almost everything. It's why she couldn't keep the money, because taking it would have been a lie, a betrayal of herself. Give her the truth, even if it costs you everything. Everything has already cost me everything, Darren said quietly. Then you have nothing left to lose, his mother replied. And everything to gain. She drifted off then, exhaustion claiming her mid-conversation. Darren sat holding her hand, watching her chest rise and fall with mechanical assistance, and understood that he was receiving deathbed wisdom. The kind of clarity that only comes when all pretense has been stripped away and there's no time left for anything but truth. He pulled out his phone and began typing. Not a message to his assistant or his partners, a message to himself. A list of things he needed to know about his sons. Their favorite colors. Their favorite foods, what scared them, what made them laugh, their dreams and fears and hopes. He had 3 boys who didn't know him, a woman who had every reason to keep it that way, and a dying mother who'd finally given him the map to navigate the mess she'd created. The sun was beginning to rise when Faith returned. She came in quietly, expecting him to be gone, and stopped short when she saw him still sitting there, his mother's hand in his. You're still here, she said. Surprised. I'm not leaving, Darren replied. Not the hospital. Not this, not them. I'm done leaving. Faith studied him in the early morning light, filtering through the window, her expression unreadable. Words come easily, Darren, she finally said. Let's see if your actions match them. She moved to check on Lorraine, her hands gentle and professional. And Darren watched her care for the woman who tried to destroy her, and knew he was witnessing something he'd need to learn. How to love people despite their failures. How to be present even when it hurt. How to be someone worth knowing. Faith, he said as she adjusted the blankets. My mother told me things. About what she did. The evidence she manufactured. The lies she told me about you. I need you to know I know, Faith interrupted quietly. She told me too. Months ago. When she first got sick. She confessed everything. And you forgave her? I'm working on it. Forgiveness isn't a switch, Darren. It's a process. Some days I manage it better than others. She looked at him directly. The question isn't whether I forgave your mother. The question is whether you can forgive yourself for believing her without question, for choosing doubt over trust, for walking away without looking back. The truth of it pierced through every defense he had left. I don't know if I can, he admitted. Then that's what you need to figure out, Faith said, because those boys deserve a father who's made peace with his past, who's done the work to become someone worthy of them, not someone drowning in guilt and regret. She was right. Again, always. Faith had a way of cutting through to the truth that left him feeling exposed but oddly free. Help me, he said. Please, I don't know how to do this. Faith looked at him for a long moment, her face showing the internal debate. Finally she sighed. Okay, she said softly, but we do this my way, slowly, carefully, with the boys' needs at the center of every decision. And the first time you disappoint them, the first time you prove that you're still the man who walks away when things get difficult, this ends. Permanently. Do you understand? I understand. Good. She pulled out her phone, checking the time. I need to get the boys to school. But I'll be back this afternoon. We can talk more then about next steps, about rules, about how this might work. She moved toward the door, then paused. Darren. she said without turning around. Yeah? Don't let me down. Not for your sake. For theirs. Because they're good kids who deserve better than disappointment. I know, he said. And they'll get better. I promise. She left without responding, and Darren was alone again, with his unconscious mother, and the massive weight of promises he hoped he could keep. The sun continued rising outside the window, washing the room in golden light, and for the first time in years, Darren felt like he was seeing clearly. He had sons who needed a father. He had a woman who needed to see proof, not promises. And he had a dying mother who'd finally given him the truth he needed to start becoming someone worth knowing. The hard work was just beginning, but he was ready. Chapter 5. The Years Between Faith returned that afternoon with a weariness that went deeper than physical exhaustion. She carried it in her shoulders, in the set of her jaw, in the way she moved through the hospital corridors like someone who'd walked this path so many times, the building itself had worn grooves in her soul. Darren had been waiting, not in the room, but near enough to see when she arrived. He'd spent the intervening hours thinking, planning, trying to construct a version of himself that these people might eventually trust. But watching Faith enter that building alone, no children this time, having presumably found someone to watch them for a few hours, he realized all his planning was worthless. He had no idea who she really was anymore. The girl he'd loved had been replaced by a woman he'd never met, forged by years of hardship he couldn't begin to understand. She went to his mother's room first. He followed at a respectful distance, giving her space to check on Lorraine without his presence complicating things. Through the window, he watched her work, checking monitors, adjusting pillows, speaking softly to his mother even though Lorraine barely stirred. There was such tenderness in her movements, such practiced care, that it hurt to witness. When she emerged, she wasn't surprised to find him waiting. "We need to talk," she said simply. "Where?" "Somewhere private." "Not here." They found an empty consultation room down the hall. Faith closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, as if gathering her strength for what came next. Darren remained standing, unable to settle, his entire body vibrating with nervous energy. "Before we discuss anything else," Faith began, "I need you to understand what the last 6 years have been like. Not so you'll pity me, not so you'll feel guilty, though you should feel guilty, but so you understand exactly what you're walking into if you try to be part of our lives. Okay. I was 19 when I got pregnant," she continued, her voice steady but distant, as if recounting someone else's story. 19 and terrified and completely alone. My family had already disowned me for dating you, told me I was making a mistake, that someone like you would never seriously commit to someone like me. I defended you, fought for you, burned every bridge I had because I believed in us. Darren flinched. He'd never known about her family situation, had never asked, had been too wrapped up in his own world to notice what Faith was sacrificing. When I realized I was pregnant, I was working at a diner, Faith said, barely making enough to cover rent in a studio apartment with 4 other girls. I couldn't tell my roommates because we'd all signed a lease that prohibited children, so I hid it. Wore baggy clothes, worked double shifts to save money I knew I'd need. She moved to a chair finally, sitting down with the controlled movements of someone whose body hurt constantly but who'd learned to hide it. I came to tell you, she continued, multiple times. But after that first attempt, when your secretary turned me away, I realized I needed proof. So I waited until my first ultrasound, got the pictures, thought maybe if you saw them, saw physical evidence, you'd believe me. I never got them, because your mother intercepted everything. Every letter, every package. She had people watching for me. When I finally gave up trying to reach you and went to her instead, she already knew, had known for weeks. And she'd been preparing, Faith's hands clenched in her lap. She offered me so much money, Darren, more than I'd ever seen in my life. Enough to raise 3 children comfortably, enough to give them good lives. And for one terrible moment I almost took it, because I was so tired, so scared, so completely overwhelmed by the thought of doing this alone. But you didn't take it, no, because taking it would have meant agreeing that my children were mistakes, that they were problems to be solved with money. And I couldn't do that to them. They were innocent. They deserved better than being bought away like inconveniences. She looked up at him then, her eyes fierce. So I left your mother's house with nothing. And I mean nothing. No money, no help, no prospects. I was 4 months pregnant with triplets, something I'd discovered at that same ultrasound, and I had exactly $200 to my name. How did you survive? Faith's laugh was bitter. Barely. I found a shelter that took pregnant women. Stayed there until they told me I needed to leave because I'd maxed out my time. Found a church that let me sleep in their basement. Worked until the day I went into labor because missing even one shift meant not eating. The images her words painted were devastating. While Darren had been celebrating his first major success, Faith had been homeless. While he'd been buying his first luxury car, she'd been wondering where her next meal would come from. I gave birth in a county hospital, she continued relentlessly. Alone. No one to hold my hand. No one to tell me I was doing okay. Just me and a team of medical professionals who were kind but overwhelmed. The boys came early, tiny. Bruce was barely over 4 pounds. Peter and Clark even smaller. They had to stay in the hospital for weeks. She paused, her breathing unsteady. Do you know what it's like to leave the hospital without your babies? To go back to a shelter because I'd found a new one by then, while your children are in incubators, fighting to breathe. To only be able to visit for a few hours a day because you're working every spare minute to try to save enough money for when they're finally released. Darren couldn't speak. His throat had closed completely. I found a small apartment eventually, Faith said. 1 room with a bathroom down the hall. Shared with 3 other families. But it was mine, ours. When the boys came home, I brought them there. 3 cribs that I found at thrift stores. Diapers I bought with coupons. Formula Y sometimes had to water down when money ran short. Faith, let me finish, she said sharply. You need to hear this, all of it. You need to understand what your choices cost us. He nodded, swallowing the protests and apologies that wanted to spill out. The first 2 years were hell, Faith continued. 3 babies. 1 mother, no help. I couldn't afford childcare, so I worked nights when the landlady agreed to listen for crying. I slept maybe 3 hours a night. The boys had colic, then ear infections, then everything else babies get when they're living in poor conditions without proper nutrition or health care. Her voice cracked slightly. Bruce almost died when he was 1. Pneumonia. I couldn't afford the copay at the emergency room, so I'd been trying to treat it at home. By the time I finally took him in, he was nearly gone. They admitted him, and I sat by his bed for 4 days straight, terrified that my poverty had killed my son. Darren felt physically sick. His son. His child had almost died while he'd been living in luxury, completely unaware. But he survived, Faith said. They all survived. Because I refused to let them do anything else. I worked harder, found better jobs, eventually got a position as a home health aide, which is how I ended up meeting your mother again, years later, when she needed care and the agency sent me without realizing the connection. Is that how? Yes, that's how I ended up caring for her. She was my client, and when she saw me walk through her door, she broke down, started apologizing immediately. Offered me money again, not to leave but to stay. To help her? To forgive her? And you did. Eventually, Faith confirmed. Not right away. I was angry, furious, but I also saw that she was genuinely remorseful. That guilt was eating her alive, and I realized that holding on to hate was only hurting me. So I forgave her, not for her sake but for mine, for the boys. Because they needed to see that people could make terrible mistakes and still find redemption. She stood, moving to the window, her back to him. Your mother started paying me better than the agency, started spending time with the boys when I brought them to appointments. They fell in love with her, called her Grandma Lorraine, and she fell in love with them too. In a way, she gave them the family connection I couldn't provide. My family still won't speak to me. The boys have no grandparents on my side, no aunts or uncles, no cousins. Just me, but they had her. Did she tell you about me? Constantly, Faith said softly. She was obsessed with you, guilty about what she'd done, desperate for me to give her permission to tell you about the boys. But I wouldn't let her. I was terrified of what would happen if you knew. Terrified how? Faith turned to face him. Terrified you'd try to take them away. You're rich, Darren. Powerful. Connected. What judge wouldn't give custody to a wealthy single father over a struggling single mother? I'd heard the stories, seen other women lose their children because they couldn't compete financially. I couldn't risk it. I would never— You already did, she interrupted. You already chose your mother's lies over me. You already walked away without a second thought. Why would I trust you with the most precious things in my life when you'd already proven you couldn't be trusted with anything else? The truth of it silenced him, so I kept them hidden, Faith said. And your mother respected that even though it killed her. She wanted to tell you so badly, wanted to fix what she'd broken. But she understood that her wants didn't matter, that protecting the boys mattered more. I'm sorry, Darren said inadequately, for all of it, for not questioning my mother's evidence, for not trying harder to find you, for not seeing what she was capable of. I'm so goddamn sorry, Faith. Apologies don't put food on the table, Faith replied. They don't pay rent or buy medicine or keep them safe. Sorry is just a word that makes you feel better while changing nothing for us. Then let me do more than apologize, Darren pleaded. Let me help. Let me be there. Let me try to give them what they should have had from the beginning. That's what we're here to discuss, Faith said. The terms. The boundaries. The rules that you'll follow without question if you want any chance at being in their lives. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. I wrote these out last night while the boys slept. I didn't sleep at all, just sat there listing everything I needed you to understand. Darren took the paper with trembling hands. The list was long, written in Faith's careful handwriting. Each point numbered and clear. The list read: 1. You do not tell the boys you're their father until I say it's okay. 2. All visits are supervised by me. No exceptions. 3. You do not buy them expensive gifts or try to impress them with money. 4. You be present when you say you will. If you commit to being somewhere, you're there. No last-minute cancellations or excuses. 5. You respect their routines. Bedtimes, meal times, homework time. These are non-negotiable. 6. You do not undermine my authority or contradict my parenting decisions in front of them. 7. You put in the work. This means learning about them, their likes, dislikes, fears, dreams, not just playing with them when it's fun. 8. You accept that they might never fully accept you, that forgiveness isn't guaranteed, that love can't be forced. 9. You protect them from your world. No introducing them to anyone from your life until we agree it's appropriate. 10. You understand that one mistake, one broken promise, one moment of putting yourself first ends this permanently. Darren read through the list twice, feeling the weight of each rule. They weren't unreasonable. They were protective, necessary, the bare minimum a father should be willing to do. I agree, he said. To all of it. That was fast, because they're fair. More than fair. These are things any parent should do automatically. I'm not negotiating conditions for being a father, Faith. I'm accepting the privilege of trying to become one. Something shifted in her expression. Not softness exactly, but acknowledgement. We'll start slow. 1 hour twice a week, here at the hospital, while your mother is still alive. The boys are already here regularly, so it won't disrupt their routine. You can interact with them casually, read to them, help with homework, whatever organic situations arise, and then we see. If that goes well, really well, consistently well, we expand. Maybe a park visit, a meal. Eventually, if you prove yourself trustworthy, you can tell them who you are. But that's months away, Darren. Maybe longer. I need to see sustained commitment before I let you disrupt their understanding of their world. I understand. Do you? Faith moved closer, her eyes searching his face. Do you really? Because this isn't a short-term project you can delegate or a problem you can solve with money. This is years of work, years of being present, years of putting them first, even when it costs you opportunities or convenience. Years of being uncomfortable and uncertain and rejected while still coming back. Are you truly prepared for that? Darren met her eyes directly. I spent years building something that means nothing. Years climbing towards success that left me empty. I'm not walking away from the one thing that actually matters just because it's hard. The boys are my sons, and I'm committed to earning the right to be their father, no matter what it takes. Your mother's in there dying, Darren whispered, gesturing toward the room. Are you going to tell her she can't see her grandchildren? Faith's expression hardened. Your mother sees them all the time. She knows them. She reads them stories. She remembers their favorite foods, and their fears and their dreams. She earned that right by being present. You haven't. The distinction destroyed him. Even his mother, the woman who'd hidden his children from him, had more claim to them than he did. How do I prove it? He asked, his pride finally crumbling completely. How do I earn the right to be their father? Faith studied him for a long moment, weighing something he couldn't see. Finally, she spoke. You start by respecting that they don't know you yet. You start by understanding that this isn't about what you want. It's about what's best for them. And if you can't do that, if you can't put them first, even when it costs you everything, then you've already failed. She moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. And Darren, whatever you're imagining, this will be like bonding moments and heartfelt conversations and instant connection. Forget it. They're going to test you, question you, make you earn every ounce of their trust. And there will be days when you want to quit, days when it feels impossible. On those days, remember that I did this alone for 6 years, that I never had the option of quitting, and that if you walk away, you prove every fear I've ever had about you was justified. I won't walk away, Darren repeated. I promise. Promises mean nothing without action, Faith said. Stop talking about what you want and start doing the work. Be consistent. Be present. Choose us over everything else. Do it for months, for years. Do it so consistently that eventually maybe we'll all believe you're serious. A nurse knocked on the door. Ms. Russell, your sons are here. They're asking for you. Faith stood, smoothing her clothes, trying to compose herself. Last chance, Darren. Last chance to walk away before this gets harder. Because once you're their father publicly, officially, there's no going back. You can't change your mind later. You can't decide it's too difficult. You're either all in or you need to leave now. Darren stood too, meeting her eyes directly. I'm all in. Whatever it takes, however long it takes. I'm not leaving. Then let's go face them together. They walked toward his mother's room, and Darren understood that he was being given a chance he absolutely didn't deserve. But he was going to take it, and he was going to prove, day by day, that he could become the father his sons deserved, because they were worth it. Faith was worth it. And maybe, if he worked hard enough, he'd discover he was worth it too. Wait, this story is not over yet. A beautiful part 2 is waiting for you. If you want part 2, make sure to subscribe to this channel, like this video, and comment, "We want part 2." Until the next video, goodbye, my beautiful family. You can enjoy more powerful stories on our 2 channels, Mr. Peter Stories and Mr. Peter's Family.